All right, so get ready. Because in today's deep dive, we're tackling a chapter that kind of turns everything we think about balance upside down. We're not just talking about, finding some inner peace in this crazy world. This is about, this universal force and how it's always working behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the chapter takes this concept of balance that we usually think about in our own lives and expands it to this cosmic level. It's like balance is a fundamental law of the universe, you know?
And it doesn't just, theorize about it. It actually gets into the nitty-gritty of where we mess things up and then gives some pretty practical advice on how to restore that balance.
Right from the get-go, the chapter grabs you with this idea that everything in nature is always trying to find equilibrium. It's like there's this invisible hand constantly adjusting, making sure things don't go too far in one direction. It's like, think about the wind. It balances out those temperature differences. Or how, ecosystems have to adapt to change. It's balance in action.
It's like this giant cosmic game of Jenga, right? Yeah. You pull out the wrong piece and the whole thing, it can come crashing down.
Exactly. And then the chapter brings in this really cool analogy. Life as a system of pendulums, all connected. Each pendulum is like a different part of our lives. Work, relationships, health, even our thoughts.
Okay, I'm picturing these pendulums all swinging back and forth. So what happens when one of those pendulums swings way too far in one direction?
Well, that's where this idea of excess potential comes in. The chapter explains that we create this excess potential whenever we give something way too much importance. It's like this. Think about standing on solid ground. No big deal, right? Now imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. Same action, standing, but totally different feeling. That cliff edge creates a ton of anxiety because you're super aware of what could go wrong.
So it's not just the actual situation, but how we see it that creates this excess potential. That makes a lot of sense. We all know that feeling when our thoughts start spiraling out of control and we get fixated on something.
Exactly. And the chapter says that our own biases, especially when we're emotional, amplify this. We distort reality. We make mountains out of molehills and pour all our energy into that one swinging pendulum.
Okay, so let me get this straight. We get fixated on something, give it way too much importance, and that creates excess potential. But the universe, it doesn't just let that imbalance slide, does it?
No way. That's where these balance forces come into play. Now, the chapter admits that we don't fully get where these forces come from or why they exist, but it's clear that they're always working to neutralize that excess potential, to bring things back into balance.
Okay, so we've got these mysterious balance forces stepping in, but you mentioned earlier that this chapter is also really practical, right? So, what does that look like in our everyday lives?
Yeah, well, the chapter doesn't try to sugarcoat it.
Right.
It actually warns that these balance forces can be kind of paradoxical. They might end up bringing about the opposite of what we wanted, which can make it feel like there's some dark force working against us.
Wait, hold on. So we create this imbalance, and then the universe tries to fix it, and it can actually make things worse. That sounds a bit frustrating.
Yeah, it definitely can be. Imagine you're working yourself to the bone thinking that's the only way to succeed. But then, boom, you burn out, you get sick.
Yeah.
Or even your colleagues start pushing back because they feel threatened by how much you're putting in. That's the balanced forces at work trying to, counteract all that excess potential you created.
Okay, so pushing too hard in one area of life can really backfire.
Yeah.
Got it. So how do we avoid becoming, victims of these balanced forces?
Well, the chapter gets into specific areas where we tend to disrupt this balance. And it starts with, work and achievement. The chapter argues that overworking can be totally counterproductive. Instead of getting you ahead, it can actually sabotage you and create all these unintended consequences.
So what you're saying is it's about finding that balance between being really engaged and dedicated to your work, but not letting it consume you. Kind of like finding that sweet spot on a seesaw.
Exactly. It suggests detaching emotionally from work while still doing your best and fulfilling your responsibilities with integrity. You still put in the effort, but you don't let the outcome dictate your self-worth or your overall well-being.
So creating healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
Finding that inner peace that doesn't depend on, outside achievements. Definitely easier said than done, but it sounds worth aiming for.
And the chapter acknowledges it's a process, and it offers some practical strategies to develop that detachment. It even talks about developing what it calls an inner guardian, a part of ourselves that observes our actions and helps us keep things in perspective.
That's a really cool image. It's like having this wise mentor whispering in your ear, saying, hey, take a step back, look at the bigger picture, especially when you're getting swept up in the chaos.
Exactly. And the chapter doesn't stop there. It goes on to explore other areas where we create imbalance, like with self-judgment. It explains how being super critical of ourselves can fuel this destructive inner battle that actually holds us back from reaching our full potential.
So you're saying that, like, beating ourselves up for our flaws is actually counterproductive. That seems kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It might seem that way, but the chapter argues that when we fixate on our shortcomings, we're giving them way more power than they deserve. It's like shining a spotlight on the things we want to change instead of focusing on our strengths and the positive qualities we want to develop.
So it's not about ignoring our flaws, but more about shifting our focus and energy toward growth and self-acceptance, right? It's like watering the flowers instead of getting obsessed with the weeds in the garden.
Exactly. The chapter suggests taking that energy that we waste on fighting our imperfections and redirecting it towards cultivating our positive qualities. It's about embracing who we are, flaws and all, and recognizing that our worth isn't tied to some, unattainable standard of perfection.
That's definitely a message we all need to hear. I mean, we live in a culture that's so obsessed with achievement and perfection. It's so easy to get caught up in that cycle of self-judgment.
Oh, absolutely. And the chapter reminds us that this constant negativity can really mess up our inner balance and attract more of what we don't want. It's like we're tuning into a frequency of dissatisfaction, and that's what we end up experiencing.
So if we're always complaining and focusing on the negative, we're actually making it more likely that those things will keep happening. That's kind of a scary thought.
Yeah, it can be. But the chapter doesn't just leave us there. It offers this simple but powerful game to help us shift to a more positive frequency. Find the positive in every situation. It might sound cheesy, but consistently looking for the good can actually rewire our brains and change our whole outlook.
Like training ourselves to see the silver linings instead of getting stuck in the rain clouds.
Exactly. And even better, the chapter throws in this great quote from King Solomon, "This too shall pass," which can be such a comforting reminder when things feel tough.
I love that quote. It's like a little mantra you can use to remind yourself that even the hardest times are temporary. But this chapter goes beyond just our relationship with ourselves, right? It also talks about how we mess up balance and how we interact with others, especially in those relationships where we become dependent on other people.
Absolutely. And this part is so insightful because it really dives into the difference between love and idealization. It argues that real love doesn't try to possess or control, but allows others to be exactly who they are without trying to change them.
So accepting people for who they are, not who we want them to be. Okay, but how do we actually do that in our relationships? It seems like it would be easy to get disappointed if we're always expecting people to live up to some, idealized version of them.
The chapter uses this beautiful analogy to get the point across. Imagine walking through a valley filled with wildflowers. It's breathtaking, right? Now picture picking all those flowers and trying to force them into something else. When we idealize people, it's kind of like picking those flowers. We're turning them into these commodities, and that sets us up for disappointment.
Because those balanced forces eventually come in to debunk the myth, as the chapter puts it. It's like trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. Reality always catches up with us.
Precisely. And the chapter gives some real-life examples of how this happens. Think of the love-struck young guy who totally idealizes his girlfriend. He builds her up in his mind, and then bam, he finds out she's not the perfect angel he imagined. Or the woman who's so focused on finding this, ideal husband that she keeps attracting the exact opposite.
So it's like we're manifesting our own fears by trying so hard to control everything. We get so caught up in forcing things to fit into this ideal picture that we end up creating the very outcome we were trying to avoid.
It's such a good reminder to let go of those rigid expectations and just embrace the beauty of imperfection, The chapter makes a big point that true fulfillment comes from accepting people for exactly who they are, not who we wish they were.
And that leads us to another way we disrupt balance, right? Judgment and comparison. The chapter says that judging others, especially with contempt, can actually lead us to experience what we're putting out there. It's like we're setting ourselves up to be judged in the same way.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. The chapter suggests that judging others often comes from this belief that we're somehow superior, which is another form of disrupting balance. It even uses the example of looking down on beggars or people with disabilities, suggesting that that kind of contempt can attract those very circumstances into our own lives.
Wow, that's pretty intense. It's like the universe is holding up this mirror, reflecting our own judgments back at us and showing us that we're not as different from those we judge as we might think.
It is humbling, right? And it points to the power of humility and compassion in creating a more harmonious world.
This has been such an insightful conversation already. We've covered a lot, from the nature of balance to how we mess it up in our work, our relationship with ourselves, and how we interact with others. I'm starting to see how this idea of balance applies to, like, every part of life.
It's a really powerful framework for understanding ourselves and the world, isn't it? And honestly, we've only just scratched the surface. So we were talking about how judging others can end up like backfiring on us. And then the chapter moves on to this whole other thing, desire, attachment, and fear, and how these really strong emotions can throw off that balance we've been talking about.
Oh, it seems like those are emotions we all experience,
Yeah.
like all the time, right?
Yeah.
So how could they possibly be the things messing everything up?
Yeah, it's not really about the emotions themselves. It's more about, how intense they get and how much we depend on them for our happiness. Like, think about desire, that really strong wanting of something, especially when it's like, we need this thing to be happy. The chapter actually says that can push away the very thing we want.
That's so weird. Wouldn't it make sense that if you really want something, putting all your energy into getting it would actually make it happen?
Not always, no. And the chapter uses this funny analogy. It's like a wild boar trying to catch a bluebird. Sometimes being chill about it, like being indifferent, can actually work better than going after it like crazy. When we're too attached to a specific outcome, we create that excess potential we were talking about, and that can block us from getting what we want.
Oh, so it's like that saying, a watch pot never boils. The more we focus on it, the longer it takes. But how are you supposed to let go of that attachment and still keep working towards your goals?
That's where the whole idea of switching your focus comes in. Instead of obsessing over the end goal, the result, you find enjoyment in the process and all the steps along the way.
So like instead of stressing about getting that promotion, I should focus on enjoying the work I'm doing right now, learning new things, and just doing my best every day. Kind of like you enjoy every bite of a delicious meal instead of just rushing through it to get to dessert.
Exactly. And it's not just work. This goes for everything. When we can shift our attention from the destination to the actual journey, we take some of that pressure off and we can be more present and involved in each moment.
Okay, I get that. But what about negative attachment? Like when you're scared of something bad happening, the chapter says that kind of fear can actually make it more likely to happen, right? It's almost like we're attracting it into our lives by giving it so much power.
Yeah, and it has this hilarious example about a guy at an embassy who is terrified of getting kicked out. He's so consumed by this fear that he starts acting all suspicious and ends up drawing attention to himself. And guess what? That makes it more likely that the very thing he's scared of will happen.
So our fears can literally become self-fulfilling prophecies if we let them run the show. It's like that saying, what you resist persists.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you get over those deep down fears? They don't just go away because we want them to.
Oh, for sure. It's a process. And the chapter emphasizes the importance of, being aware of those fears. The first step is to recognize them and admit they have power over us. Then we can start to challenge them, to ask if they're real or if they're just our imaginations going wild.
So it's like questioning those beliefs that hold us back and focusing on more positive, empowering thoughts. But that sounds so much easier said than done. It's like telling someone who's terrified of spiders to just calm down when they see one.
Right. It's not about pretending those feelings aren't there or trying to shove them down. It's about acknowledging them, seeing them without judgment, and then choosing to focus on something more positive and helpful.
Okay, that makes more sense. It's about retraining our brains, basically.
Yeah.
To focus on what we want, not on what we're afraid of. But this chapter, it goes beyond just individual emotions, right? It also digs into guilt and how that messes with our balance.
This part was really interesting because it kind of turns what we think about guilt on its head. It says guilt is like pure excess potential, whether we deserve it or not.
So you're saying that guilt is always a bad thing, even if we've done something wrong and should feel guilty?
Yeah.
How does that even work?
The chapter argues that these balanced forces, they don't care about good or bad actions. They're just focused on restoring balance. So even if we did something good and feel proud, that pride can also create excess potential, and that can lead to some unintended consequences.
It's like the universe doesn't see our actions as good or bad in the same way we do, right? It just responds to the energy we're putting out, regardless of what we meant to do. Okay, but if guilt is always bad, how do we make things right when we've hurt someone or messed up?
That's a great question, and the chapter talks about that directly. It's not about pretending you didn't do something wrong or not being accountable. It's about recognizing that feeling guilty doesn't fix anything. It just keeps us stuck in this loop of self-punishment and stops us from moving forward.
So instead of beating ourselves up and dwelling on our mistakes, We should focus on fixing things, learning from what happened, and doing something positive to make it right.
Right. It's about owning up to your actions without getting bogged down and blaming yourself. And there's another point the chapter makes. Manipulators use guilt to control people. So, refusing to take on guilt that isn't ours to carry can actually protect us from those kinds of people.
So it's about recognizing the difference between healthy guilt, the kind that pushes us to make things right, and toxic guilt, which people often use to manipulate and control us.
Exactly. And it gives us powerful advice. Give yourself permission to be yourself. No one has the right to judge you. It's about taking back your power and letting go of that guilt that weighs you down.
There's that idea of self-acceptance again. We're all perfectly imperfect, and it's about embracing that, letting ourselves make mistakes without letting those mistakes define who we are.
It's about letting go of the need to be perfect. Real growth happens when we embrace our imperfections and learn from our experiences.
And speaking of things we tend to get caught up in, the next section is all about money. It seems like our relationship with money is almost always a source of stress and throws things out of balance.
And this section really challenges how we usually think about wealth. It says that being super attached to money can actually stop us from both being successful financially and from being truly happy.
That seems kind of crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, most people think the more money you have, the happier you'll be. But you're saying that's not actually true.
Yeah, the chapter suggests that money is just something that comes along with our goals, not the goal itself. It has this really interesting piece of advice. Focus on your goals, not on getting rich, and the money will follow. It's about shifting your focus from the how to the what.
So if my goal is, say, to travel the world, I should focus on the excitement of travel, all the cool things I want to do, and not just on how much money it'll cost. Like, follow your passion, and the money will show up.
Exactly. The chapter argues that when we make money the main goal, we're actually serving someone else's agenda, like the agenda of the money pendulum, and that can take us further away from what we really want in life.
It's like trading in our true desires for something that just represents those desires, and like losing sight of what truly matters.
It's a good reminder to look at our motives and make sure we're not chasing something that won't really fulfill us in the end.
So it's not about rejecting money altogether, but finding that balance where money helps us achieve our goals and makes our lives better without becoming the main thing driving us, right? It's like money is a tool, not the boss.
Exactly. And the chapter really emphasizes that true abundance comes from being in line with our passions and going after our goals with, integrity and purpose.
And that leads us to the last area the chapter covers, perfectionism. It seems like everyone's trying to be perfect these days, but the chapter says that this pursuit, even though it seems positive, can actually create a ton of imbalance.
Yeah, this section might surprise people because perfectionism is often seen as a good thing. But the chapter argues that striving for perfection, even though it might seem admirable, can actually lead to this constant struggle with those balanced forces we've been talking about.
So even though it seems like trying to be perfect would create a more balanced life, it can actually have the opposite effect. It's like trying to hold back a huge wave with a tiny broom.
Exactly. The chapter explains that perfectionists often project their own standards onto other people, which creates conflict and makes everyone unhappy. It's like they're trying to control everyone and everything around them to fit into their perfect little world. And that's a recipe for burnout and frustration.
And the chapter also warns that this obsession with always being right can turn into feeling superior and wanting to control others. And we already know that that throws balance way off. It's like perfectionism becomes a disguise for feeling insecure and needing to be in charge.
Right. It's a powerful reminder that real confidence comes from accepting yourself, flaws and all, and recognizing that everyone's on their own unique path.
So how do you find that balance between like trying to be great at something and letting go of the need to be absolutely perfect? It feels like there's a really thin line between those two things.
That's a great question, and it takes us to the core of the chapter. The key to balance is reducing importance.
Reducing importance. We've touched on that throughout this whole deep dive, but can you break it down for us? What does it really mean, and how do we actually do it in our own lives?
Absolutely. We'll dive into that powerful concept and explore how it can totally change our experience of life. So before we went to that last break, we were getting into this whole idea of reducing importance as the key to unlocking a more balanced life.
And I'll admit, when I first heard reducing importance, it sounded a little bit like, giving up or not caring about anything.
Yeah.
But from everything we've talked about so far, it seems like there's a lot more to it than that, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The chapter makes it clear that reducing importance doesn't mean you become passive or, like, shut down your emotions. It's more about shifting how you see things, loosening up on how you think things should be, and realizing that you can't control absolutely everything.
So it's about, like, accepting what is instead of fighting against it or trying to force things to fit into how we think they should be.
Exactly. And this connects back to what we were talking about before with, attachment and desire. When we're super attached to a specific result, we create that excess potential, and that can actually block us from getting what we want. Reducing importance lets us detach from that outcome and find some peace and acceptance right now in the present moment.
It's like we're letting go of the reins a little bit and letting a greater force guide us, trusting that we'll end up where we're supposed to be, even if it doesn't look exactly how we planned it. But this all sounds a bit, well, theoretical. How do we actually put this idea of reducing importance into practice?
The chapter actually gives some pretty solid advice. It says we should start by noticing when we're giving a situation way too much importance. Like, pay attention to those times when you're feeling super anxious or stressed or stuck on a particular outcome. That's usually a sign that you're giving something way more weight than it needs.
So, like, become an importance detective, always looking for clues that we're getting caught up in the drama.
I love that. And once you've spotted those moments, the next step is to make a conscious choice to tone down the significance of whatever is causing that imbalance.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? It's one thing to recognize that you're giving something too much importance, but it's a whole other thing to actually let go of that attachment.
Right. There are a few helpful strategies the chapter talks about. One is to find safety nets or other solutions to lessen your anxiety and your dependence on one specific outcome.
Can you give us an example of what that would look like in, real life?
Sure. Imagine you're stressed about a job interview. You've been preparing for weeks and you really want this job. But what if, instead of putting all your hope on this one interview, you also apply for a few other jobs that you think would be cool? That way, even if this one doesn't work out, you've got other possibilities. You're reducing the importance of this single interview by having a backup plan.
That's a really good example. So it's about not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? Having other options so you're not so fixated on just one thing. What other strategies does the chapter suggest?
Another one is to focus on the process of actually doing things instead of being fixated on the end goal.
So, like, instead of obsessing over getting that promotion, I should concentrate on enjoying the work I'm doing right now, learning new skills, and just giving my best effort each day.
Exactly. It's about finding satisfaction in the journey itself, not just pinning all your happiness on some far-off destination.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like taking a road trip and enjoying the scenery along the way instead of just rushing to get to the destination. You might miss out on some pretty cool stuff if you just focus on the end goal.
And this brings us back to that pendulum analogy. If we're too busy trying to make one pendulum swing super high, we're ignoring all the other pendulums in our lives.
So balance is about spreading out our energy, realizing that life is about all these interconnected experiences, not just a race to the finish line, right?
I like that. And the chapter also says it's important to cultivate a sense of humor, to be able to laugh at yourself, which can be super powerful in taking things less seriously.
It's like laughter is this release valve that lets out some of the pressure and reminds us to not take ourselves too seriously.
Exactly. When you can laugh at your own mistakes and imperfections, you're taking away their power over you.
And isn't that really what this whole chapter is all about? Like taking back our power by letting go of the things we cling to, our need to control, our fear of messing up, our obsession with being perfect.
You got it. It's about realizing that true freedom and fulfillment come from surrendering to how life unfolds, trusting that we're being guided, even when things don't go exactly as planned.
It's like learning to dance with those balanced forces instead of trying to fight against them.
Which sounds way more fun and a lot more graceful.
Right. This has been an amazing deep dive. I'm feeling really inspired to take a look at my own life and see where I might be giving things too much importance. It's like you've given me a whole new set of tools to navigate all the ups and downs life throws at me.
That's great. Just remember, it's all about taking small steps, being kind to yourself, and trusting the process. And like the chapter says, a little bit of humor can go a long way in helping us stay balanced and keep things light.
Well, that's it for today's deep dive. I hope you found it as interesting and thought-provoking as I have. Keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.